A reading from Luke, chapter 4, verses 1 through 13. Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit in the wilderness, where for 40 days he was tested by the devil. He ate nothing at all during those days, and when they were over he was famished. The devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command this stone to become a loaf of bread." Jesus answered him, "It is written, 'One does not live by bread alone.'" Then the devil led him up and showed him in an instant all the kingdoms of the world. And the devil said to him, "To you I will give all this authority and their glory, for it has been given to me, and I give it to anyone I please. If you, then, will worship me, it will be all yours." Jesus answered him, "It is written, 'Worship the Lord your God and serve only him.'" Then the devil led him to Jerusalem and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from here. For it is written, 'He will command his angels concerning you, to protect you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone.'" Jesus answered him, "It is said, 'Do not put the Lord your God to the test.'" When the devil had finished every test, he departed from him until an opportune time.
Years ago, there was a show on HGTV called The Unsellables about these homeowners who, for whatever reason, were having a hard time selling their homes. They couldn't figure out why their homes were sitting on the market without any offers. And so in each episode, a team of experts would swoop in to diagnose and solve their bewildering real estate mystery and finally get the house sold. It was nail-biting, suspenseful TV at its finest. The only episode I ever watched featured this family who couldn't sell their home because, according to the show's experts, they had accumulated way too much stuff, and all their stuff was making their home appear much smaller than it actually was. So the experts brought in a couple of professional stagers. There's actually such a thing as a professional stager. And these stagers walked through the entire house with these homeowners, inspecting each room, and told them bluntly, unapologetically, this has to go, that has to go, and this definitely has to go. And it went on, room by room, until by the end of that walkthrough, the professionals made their professional recommendation. Half the contents of the house had to be eliminated. Easy chairs, coffee tables, artwork and photos, area rugs, knickknacks, family heirlooms. It all had to go. And I only remember the episode because I wondered in that moment how I might actually feel if somebody casually strolled through my house and informed me that half my stuff was undesirable, unsightly, clutter, rummage. Like my bobblehead and beer stein collections, my obsolete Bible commentaries lining my bookshelves, my precious catalog of Rolling Stone magazines, my 35-year-old futon from college. Could I ever part with these precious treasures? But in the show, these homeowners were eventually convinced to haul it all away. And by the end of the show, sure enough, all these prospective buyers were walking through that same house, all saying the same thing. Wow, this house looks so spacious. Some of the most important work we can ever do is to make space in our lives. When we look within ourselves and eliminate the spiritual, emotional, mental clutter, our interior gets larger, roomier, more expansive, and our life becomes a more habitable place for God, for the things that give our life meaning and purpose. When we take inventory of our lives and consider all that we possess, all that we give our time to, our to-do list, and social responsibilities and obligations, all the thoughts and worries and concerns that occupy our minds, how much room have we left in our lives for what really matters? We live by letting go. We add through subtraction. We are filled by emptying ourselves. This is our theme for Lent, the beautiful empty. Some say it was Blaise Pascal, the 17th century mathematician and philosopher, who said, there is a God-shaped vacuum in the heart of every person that can only be filled by God. Have you ever felt this hole in the heart, this void or emptiness out of which comes this deep longing for something more, something missing or lacking in your life? Augustine once spoke of it as the restlessness of the heart that can only find rest in God. We all know something of this God-shaped hole, this restlessness. What is it? What exactly are we longing for? The two deepest longings of the human heart are to know who we are and to know why we are here. Our lifelong project is to discover our true self and our reason for being, our who and our why. These two longings are what constitute the hole in the heart of every person. Who am I really? And what am I here to do? And these are two questions that we cannot answer apart from God. Which is why it shouldn't surprise us that these two questions were the same questions Jesus asked of himself. Who am I and what am I here to do? Even Jesus knew something about this God-shaped hole in his heart. Even Jesus had to answer these two questions for himself. When Jesus was about 30 years old, he had reached the age at which most Jewish males of his day would choose a career path: fisherman, carpenter, shepherd, mason, merchant. Those were among the most popular career choices, but Jesus chose none of them. Jesus chose the path of the Messiah. And you might have assumed that this path had actually been chosen for him by God, that he had no real choice in the matter. But in today's gospel reading, it's very clear Jesus had to make a choice about who he was going to be and what he would do with his life. In Luke's gospel, a lot of people actually seem to already know Jesus is the Messiah before Jesus actually makes the choice for himself. People like his mother, who had been told by an angel before his birth that he would be the Son of God, and Elizabeth, who confirmed that news. A few others, like the shepherds at his birth, a priest named Simeon in the temple, his cousin John at the Jordan. They were all somehow given to see who Jesus really was, but Jesus himself doesn't seem to know, or at least he doesn't go public with it until he's about 30 years old. Before then, actually, Luke says Jesus increased in wisdom and in years and in divine and human favor. He was still becoming. But at around 30 years old, something happens the moment he's baptized by his cousin John. Jesus undergoes this dramatic and life-changing experience at his baptism. As he rises from the waters of the Jordan, a voice from heaven, God's voice, speaks this tender, powerful affirmation over him. That voice says, "You are my son, the beloved." Did you know that these very words, "You are my son, the beloved," are found in Psalm 2? They were the ancient words spoken by the priest whenever a new king was coronated in Israel. At the coronation ceremony, the priest would anoint the new king with oil and lay his hand on the king's head and say these words on God's behalf: "You are my son, the beloved." And this was the very moment when a king became a king. And at his baptism, Jesus hears these same words spoken by God, "You are my Son, the beloved." And in that moment, Jesus knows who he really is and what he is here to do. You are my beloved. It's God's way of saying you are Messiah and I love you all at once. And it changes everything. To be told that you are loved is, in a very real way, to hear that you have a purpose. And it's no small thing. Has anyone ever spoken those words to you? I love you. I've shared before about how in my very first year of ministry, I sat at the hospital bed of a member of my church in his last few days of life. He was 84 years old. I was 23. I'd been a pastor for 9 months, inexperienced, clueless, just trying not to say the wrong thing to a really good man who was about to leave this world. And the day before he died, he asked me to pray, and I held his thick, calloused hand and prayed over the chatter of nurses and machines. And as I turned toward the door to leave, I heard the words I least expected to hear in that moment. He said, "I love you." And I knew that he meant it, and I knew what he meant by it. And I think that was the day I really became a pastor. In his baptism, Jesus hears the words, "You are my beloved," and something in him changes. It's the moment he truly knows who he is and what he will do with his life. But then almost all at once, Jesus finds himself in the wilderness. The wilderness is a symbolic place of testing in the Hebrew worldview. Throughout Scripture, the wilderness is where humans wrestle with God, with adversaries, with themselves. Jacob, Abraham, Elijah, Moses, Joseph, they all found themselves in the wilderness at some point in their life, this testing ground where they discovered who they truly were. The Hebrew word for wilderness is midbar, the root of which means speak or word. God speaks in the wilderness. And in his wilderness, Jesus wrestles with the question that we all will wrestle with at some point in our life. Am I truly God's beloved? After 40 days in the wilderness, Jesus is famished and worn down, and he's confronted by what Luke in his gospel calls the devil. Medieval art portrayed the devil in monstrous images, and ancient literature portrayed the devil as the father of lies, the essence or embodiment of evil. But whatever the devil looks like in this story, it's interesting. He's not the modern caricature we might imagine, the one with horns and a tail, dressed in a red cape and holding a pitchfork. In fact, there's nothing in Luke's description here of the devil to suggest that he's even evil. The devil in this story does nothing violent or demonic or even hostile. Can I give you a different understanding here of the devil? In the Greek, the word for the devil is diabolou. Diabolou. It means literally the slanderer or the accuser. Perhaps at the heart of all evil is this dark power that seeks to slander that which God has already named beloved, to accuse us of not being beloved. Perhaps that is the real mission here of the devil in this story, to strip Jesus of his true identity as the beloved, to accuse him of not measuring up. And what does the slanderer do? How does he do this? He tests Jesus in ways that every one of us are tested. First, the slanderer says, if you really are the Son of God, prove it. by turning these stones into loaves of bread. Jesus is starving. Bread would satisfy his hunger in that moment, but the test is not about the bread itself. The test is whether he believes his belovedness depends on his ability to produce something like bread. And are we all faced with this same test in life? By this same question, will I tie my self-worth to my achievement? Am I only worthy of love based on what I'm able to produce? The test for Jesus and for all of us is whether we will buy into that age-old myth that says, I am what I do. I am what I make. I am my titles, my position. I am the sum of my work. This myth robs us of our belovedness. Performance, achievement, the fear that if I do not get the grade, the promotion, the award, then I am somehow unworthy of love, of value. This is the great slander or accusation of our generation. It keeps us filling that hole in the heart with things that do not satisfy. It keeps us running in circles. Eknath East Warren, the great spiritual writer, wrote about coming to North America and visiting San Francisco for the very first time. He walked into an old building built in the 1930s that had this big, heavy glass revolving door. He had never experienced a revolving door before, and once he got in, he couldn't figure out how to get out. Every time he neared an opening, the door would slap up behind him and push him past. The harder he pushed to get around and try again, the faster he was pushed around. And he was trapped. He just kept going around and around until his American wife called out to him and said, all you have to do is stop. And he stopped. And the door stopped. And he was free. The problem with turning stones into bread is that it's hard to stop once you start, especially when others praise you for it or depend on you for it. If who you are is tied up in what you produce, it can be a never-ending revolving door. It just keeps you running in circles. The belovedness of Jesus is not determined by what he produces. His power comes not from his achievements, but from his identity as God's beloved. The slanderer takes Jesus to the temple rooftop and says, if you really are the beloved, then jump. Prove to the world that you are so special, so entitled, so extraordinary that God will not let you fall. Here's another test we all face in life. Will I live my life according to how others perceive me? Am I what others believe me to be, their opinions and judgments? Am I who others say I am? Did you know that most art historians agree that the Mona Lisa, while a very good painting, probably isn't worthy of being considered the most famous painting in the world? It's not even considered Da Vinci's best work. There's a lot to be said for its artistic technique and the subtle gradations of light and shadow, the transitions between colors and tones, but the Mona Lisa isn't the most famous painting in the world because of all those things. Lots of paintings have those things. The Mona Lisa is the most famous painting in the world because it was stolen 100 years ago. And then it went missing for a year. And then it was featured in the then brand new medium of big newspapers and color printing. In other words, what made the Mona Lisa most famous is that everyone talked about it and everyone else believed what they heard about it. All those voices telling us who we are, which should we listen to? Some have said that to be emotionally healthy, people should listen to the voices that cheer from their balconies, rather than to listen to the whispers that criticize them from their cellars. Balcony voices and cellar voices. Our balcony people, they're not the uncritical fans. They're people who affirm the image of God in us, who see us as beloved in all circumstances, who cheer us on even when we fail because they see in us what we can't always see in ourselves. And they counter the cellar voices that are whispering at us, pulling us downward, slandering our belovedness, and feeding our fear of not measuring up, demanding that we always prove our worthiness. Jesus the Beloved knows that he's more than the impressions and the opinions that others have of him. And finally, the slanderer shows Jesus the kingdoms of the world and says, I'll give you everything. You can rule the whole world if you'll worship me. It's the test of whether we will buy into the myth that we are what we possess. How did that old song from Tears of Fears back in the 80s put it? All for freedom and for pleasure. Nothing ever lasts forever. Everybody wants to rule the world. A man was reading the newspaper one morning and was shocked to find his own obituary. Actually, it was his older brother's obituary who had died. But due to a journalistic error, the obituary told the story of his death. His name? Alfred Nobel. And the obituary referred to him as the merchant of death, the dynamite king. It denounced the fortune he had amassed from the manufacture and sale of weapons of mass destruction. On that day, Alfred Nobel decided to change his story before it was too late. On November 27th, 1895, Nobel wrote his last will and testament. He then invested his estate into a fund, the interest on which would be annually distributed in the form of prizes to those who during the preceding year had conferred the greatest benefit to mankind. The interest was to be divided into 5 equal parts, each part given to the person who had made the most important discovery each year in the fields of medicine, chemistry, physics, literature, and finally, the 5th part, to the person who shall have done the most or the best work for fraternity between nations, for the abolition or reduction of standing armies, and for the holding and promotion of peace, the Nobel Peace Prize. We are tested every day. The test is, who are we? And what are we here for? Our takeaways for today: we are not what we produce. We are not the impressions and opinions others have of us. We are not what we possess. We are God's beloved.